The CNN debate studio fell silent when Kristi Noem opened her folder and pulled out official FBI crime statistics. Gavin Newsom's confident smirk disappeared as she began reading numbers that completely contradicted everything he had just claimed about California's safety record. What happened next would become the most viral political moment of the year. The stage was set for what CNN had billed as a tale of two Americas, a primetime debate between two governors representing vastly different visions for the country's future. On one side sat Gavin Newsom, the 56-year-old governor of California, perfectly groomed in his signature Navy suit, radiating the confidence of someone who had never lost a major political battle. His silver hair was styled to perfection, his smile was camera-ready, and his talking points were polished to a shine that could blind his opponents. Across from him sat Kristi Noem, the 52-year-old governor of South Dakota, dressed in a professional burgundy blazer that commanded respect without seeking attention. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a style that said she was here for business, not photo ops. While Newsom represented the progressive elite of America's most populous state, Noem embodied the practical conservative values of America's heartland. What the audience didn't know was that she had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and the folder beside her contained information that would change the entire trajectory of both their political careers. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these explosive political moments that are reshaping America. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when preparation meets arrogance on live television. The debate had been months in the making. CNN's political director had pitched it as the perfect encapsulation of America's political divide, the progressive West Coast versus the conservative heartland, innovation versus tradition, the future versus the past. Newsom had immediately agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to showcase his presidential ambitions on a national stage. For him, this wasn't just a debate with a Republican governor from a flyover state. This was his audition for the Democratic nomination in 2028. Noem had been more reluctant initially. Her advisors worried about the optics of a governor from a state with fewer than 1 million people going head-to-head with the leader of the world's 5th largest economy. But Noem saw something her staff didn't, an opportunity to expose the massive gap between progressive rhetoric and progressive results. She had been quietly building a file on California's real performance metrics for months, waiting for the right moment to use them. The CNN studios in Atlanta were buzzing with energy on the night of the debate. The audience was carefully selected to represent a cross-section of American political thought, with equal numbers of Democrats, Republicans, and independents. Anderson Cooper, serving as moderator, had prepared questions designed to highlight the fundamental differences between the two governors' approaches to governance. As the cameras rolled and the red recording lights flickered on, both governors took their positions behind sleek podiums positioned 12 feet apart. The lighting was dramatic but fair, designed to make both participants look presidential. Behind them, a massive screen displayed the CNN logo alongside the debate title, Red State, Blue State, America's Crossroads. Newsom's preparation had been typical of his approach to major political events. A team of 12 advisors, focus group testing of key phrases, and multiple rehearsal sessions with professional debate coaches. He had practiced his most devastating lines until they sounded natural, memorized statistics that painted California as a progressive paradise, and prepared attack lines that would paint Noem as an extremist from a backward state that time forgot. Noem's preparation had been different. Instead of focus groups and coaches, she had spent hours with actual data analysts, economists, and law enforcement officials. She had requested every public report on California's crime statistics from the past 5 years, cross-referenced them with federal data, and built a comprehensive picture of what was really happening in America's most progressive state. Her folder contained not talking points, but facts. Not spin, but statistics. Not political rhetoric, but raw, undeniable truth. Anderson Cooper opened the debate with a question about economic policy, allowing both governors to present their visions for America's future. Newsom launched into his well-rehearsed opening, painting California as a beacon of progressive success that the rest of America should emulate. Anderson, California represents the future, Newsom began, his voice carrying the smooth confidence that had made him a media darling. We've proven that progressive policies don't just work in theory, they work in practice. Our economy is booming, our innovation sector leads the world, and we've shown that you can protect the environment while creating jobs and opportunity. He gestured grandly as he spoke, his body language suggesting he was addressing not just the studio audience, but the entire nation. We've implemented common-sense gun safety measures, invested in education and healthcare, and created a society that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. Compare that to states like South Dakota, where they're still fighting battles from the last century while we're building the economy of the next century. The audience applauded politely, though the response was notably lukewarm from the Republican and Independent sections. Newsom's smile widened as he delivered what he clearly thought was his knockout line. The choice for America is simple. We can move forward with proven progressive policies, or we can go backwards to failed conservative ideology that benefits only the privileged few. Cooper turned to Noem, giving her the opportunity to respond. She remained seated, her hands folded calmly in front of her, showing no signs of the defensive anger that Newsom's team had expected to provoke. "Thank you, Anderson," Noem said, her voice steady and measured. "I always find it interesting when politicians talk about their records in terms of theory and ideology rather than actual results. Governor Newsom has certainly mastered the art of making progressive policies sound appealing in speech form." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "But the American people deserve to know what those policies actually accomplish when they're implemented in the real world. They deserve to see the data behind the rhetoric." Newsom's smile tightened slightly. This wasn't the defensive, emotional response his team had predicted. Noem was staying calm, staying focused, and most dangerously, she was staying fact-based. The next 20 minutes followed a predictable pattern. Cooper asked about immigration, and Newsom launched into a passionate defense of California's sanctuary policies, painting them as both morally necessary and practically beneficial. He cited statistics about economic growth and crime reduction that made California sound like a progressive utopia. When asked about education, Newsom spoke glowingly about California's investment in public schools and universities, claiming they were preparing students for the jobs of tomorrow, while red states clung to outdated curricula. His performance was polished, passionate, and completely convincing if you didn't have access to the actual data. Throughout Newsom's presentations, Noem remained remarkably composed. She responded to his attacks with measured rebuttals, defended her own state's record with quiet confidence, and consistently redirected the conversation toward actual outcomes rather than policy intentions. But she hadn't yet revealed the bombshell evidence that would transform the entire debate. That moment came when Cooper asked about public safety, specifically about the role of law enforcement in modern society. It was a question designed to highlight the philosophical differences between the two governors, but it would become the trigger for the most devastating political takedown in recent memory. Newsom's response was everything his team had hoped for. He spoke passionately about California's approach to criminal justice reform, painting a picture of a state that had successfully balanced public safety with social justice. His voice carried moral authority as he described policies designed to address root causes of crime while maintaining community safety. "We've proven that you don't need to choose between justice and safety," Newsom declared, his voice building to a crescendo. "California has implemented comprehensive criminal justice reforms that address systemic inequalities while keeping our communities safe. We've reduced incarceration rates while maintaining public safety, invested in education and mental health services instead of just building more prisons." He pointed directly at Noem as he delivered what he thought was his devastating attack. Meanwhile, governors like Kristi Noem continue to pursue failed tough-on-crime policies that have proven ineffective everywhere they've been tried. Her approach represents the worst kind of backwards thinking: more punishment, less prevention; more incarceration, less rehabilitation. The audience murmured as Newsom continued his assault. The data is clear. Progressive states like California have found ways to reduce crime while respecting human dignity. Conservative states like South Dakota are stuck in the past, pursuing policies that don't work and don't reflect American values. Newsom's confidence was at its peak as he delivered his final line. The American people can choose between California's proven approach to public safety or South Dakota's failed philosophy of punishment over prevention. The applause from the Democratic section of the audience was enthusiastic and sustained. Newsom's smile was radiant as he basked in what he clearly believed was a moment of triumph. His team in the green room was already preparing press releases about his commanding debate performance. That's when Kristi Noem quietly reached for a folder. The change in the studio atmosphere was subtle but unmistakable. Something in Noem's demeanor suggested that the real debate was about to begin. She didn't speak immediately, instead taking a moment to organize the documents in her folder with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years preparing for this exact moment. "Governor Newsom," she said finally, her voice cutting through the lingering applause with surgical precision. "You've painted a very compelling picture of California's success. Your talking points are well-rehearsed, and your statistics sound impressive." She stood up slowly, her movement drawing every camera in the studio. The audience sensed something significant was about to happen, and the murmuring gradually faded to complete silence. "But I think the American people deserve to see the actual data behind your claims," Noem continued, pulling a thick stack of documents from her folder. "Because while you've been giving speeches about California's success, I've been studying the real numbers." Newsom's expression flickered with the first hint of uncertainty. This wasn't in any of his preparation materials. His team had expected attacks on California, but they had prepared responses to typical Republican talking points about taxes and regulations. Nobody had anticipated that Noem would come armed with comprehensive data analysis. For example, Noem said, holding up the first document, "You just claimed that California has maintained public safety while implementing progressive reforms. Let's examine that claim using official FBI crime statistics." She walked to the large screen behind the podiums, her movements deliberate and confident. A production assistant, following prearranged signals, prepared to display whatever documents Noem was about to present. "These are the FBI's uniform crime reporting statistics for violent crime rates per 100,000 residents," Noem announced as an official-looking chart appeared on the screen. "Governor Newsom, would you like to tell the audience what these numbers show about California's crime rates over the past 5 years?" The chart was devastating in its simplicity. It showed violent crime rates for all 50 states, with California highlighted in red and South Dakota highlighted in blue. The numbers told a story that completely contradicted everything Newsom had just claimed. California's violent crime rate was 442.8 per 100,000 residents. South Dakota's was 204.4 per 100,000 residents. California's rate was more than double that of South Dakota. The studio fell completely silent as the audience absorbed the implications of what they were seeing. Newsom's face had gone pale, his confident smile replaced by the tight expression of someone who realized they had walked into a trap. "But that's just violent crime overall," Noem continued, her voice remaining calm and professional. "Let's break it down by category." Another chart appeared on the screen, showing homicide rates by state. California, 5.6 per 100,000. South Dakota, 2.8 per 100,000. Again, California's rate was exactly double that of South Dakota. Robbery rates, Noem announced as the next chart appeared. California, 123.4 per 100,000. South Dakota, 15.2 per 100,000. California's robbery rate was more than 8 times higher than South Dakota's. The pattern continued with every category. Aggravated assault, motor vehicle theft, burglary. In every single category, California's crime rates were dramatically higher than South Dakota's. The progressive paradise Newsom had described was revealed to be one of the most dangerous states in America. But Noem wasn't finished. She returned to her folder and pulled out another set of documents. "Now, Governor Newsom," she said, "you also claimed that California's approach has been successful in maintaining community safety. Let's look at how California compares to the national average." The new chart that appeared on screen was even more damaging. It showed that California's violent crime rate was 32% higher than the national average, while South Dakota's was 45% below the national average. In fact, Noem continued, walking closer to Newsom's podium, California ranks 14th worst in the nation for violent crime. Out of 50 states, only 13 have higher violent crime rates than your progressive paradise. Newsom tried to interrupt, but Noem held up her hand. "I'm not finished, Governor. Because the most shocking part isn't just how dangerous California has become. It's how much more dangerous it's getting." The next chart showed California's crime trends over the past 5 years. Every single category of violent crime had increased. Homicides were up 31%. Robberies were up 23%. Aggravated assaults were up 18%. "While you've been implementing your progressive criminal justice reforms," Noem said, her voice now carrying an edge of moral authority, "violent crime in California has skyrocketed. Every single category of violent crime has increased significantly over the past 5 years." She turned to face the cameras directly. "Compare that to South Dakota, where we've maintained traditional law enforcement approaches. Our violent crime rate has decreased by 12% over the same period." The audience was stunned into silence. Several people could be heard gasping audibly as the full scope of the data became clear. This wasn't a difference of opinion or political philosophy. This was a complete demolition of Newsom's claims using his own state's official crime statistics. But Kristi Noem still wasn't done. "Governor Newsom," she said, returning to her folder once more, "you specifically criticized my state's approach to criminal justice. You called our policies failed and backwards. Let me show you exactly how backwards our results are." The next chart showed crime clearance rates, the percentage of crimes that result in arrests. In South Dakota, 68% of violent crimes resulted in arrests. In California, only 42% of violent crimes resulted in arrests. Not only is California more than twice as dangerous as South Dakota, Noem explained, but criminals in California are much more likely to get away with their crimes. Your progressive approach doesn't just fail to prevent crime, it fails to solve crimes after they happen. Newsom finally found his voice, though it lacked the confident authority he had displayed earlier. "These statistics are taken out of context," he said, his media training kicking in. "California is a much larger and more diverse state than South Dakota. You can't make direct comparisons between population size is already accounted for in these statistics," Governor Noem interrupted smoothly. "These are per capita rates. They're designed specifically to allow direct comparisons between states of different sizes." She walked back to the screen and pointed to the chart. "But if you'd like to talk about context, let's provide some. California has a population of nearly 40 million people. South Dakota has fewer than 900,000. Yet despite having 44 times more residents, California also has 44 times more police officers, 44 times more judges, and 44 times more prosecutors." The mathematics were inescapable. California wasn't disadvantaged by its size. It had proportionally the same resources as South Dakota, but was producing dramatically worse results. "Governor Newsom," she said, returning to her folder once more, "you specifically criticized my state's approach to criminal justice. You called our policies failed and backwards. Let me show you exactly how backwards our results are." The next chart showed crime clearance rates, the percentage of crimes that result in arrests. In South Dakota, 68% of violent crimes resulted in arrests. In California, only 42% of violent crimes resulted in arrests. Not only is California more than twice as dangerous as South Dakota, Noem explained, but criminals in California are much more likely to get away with their crimes. Your progressive approach doesn't just fail to prevent crime, it fails to solve crimes after they happen. Newsom finally found his voice, though it lacked the confident authority he had displayed earlier. "These statistics are taken out of context," he said, his media training kicking in. "California is a much larger and more diverse state than South Dakota. You can't make direct comparisons between population size is already accounted for in these statistics," Governor Noem interrupted smoothly. These are per capita rates. They're designed specifically to allow direct comparisons between states of different sizes. She walked back to the screen and pointed to the chart. But if you'd like to talk about context, let's provide some. California has a population of nearly 40 million people. South Dakota has fewer than 900,000. Yet despite having 44 times more residents, California also has 44 times more police officers, 44 times more judges, and 44 times more prosecutors. The mathematics were inescapable. California wasn't disadvantaged by its size. It had proportionally the same resources as South Dakota, but was producing dramatically worse results. The real context, Governor Newsom, Noem continued, is that California spends more per capita on law enforcement than South Dakota does. Your state has every advantage. More resources, more money, more personnel, and yet your crime rates are double ours. She paused to let that sink in before delivering her next bombshell. But the most interesting context comes from California's own data trends. Let me show you when California's crime rates began to increase. The new chart showed California's crime rates over a 10-year period, with specific policy implementation dates marked. The pattern was unmistakable. Crime rates had begun their sharp upward trajectory immediately after the implementation of several key progressive criminal justice reforms. Proposition 47, which reclassified many felonies as misdemeanors, was implemented in November 2014. Noem explained, pointing to a marked date on the chart. Property crime rates began increasing immediately afterward. Another marked date appeared. AB 109, which shifted responsibility for certain prisoners from state to county facilities, was implemented in 2011. Violent crime rates began increasing the following year. The correlation between progressive policy implementation and crime increases was stark and undeniable. Every major reform had been followed by corresponding increases in the types of crimes those reforms were supposed to address. This isn't theory, Governor Newsom, Noem said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone presenting irrefutable evidence. This is cause and effect documented in your own state's crime statistics. The studio audience was completely silent now, absorbed in watching what had become less a political debate than a systematic demolition of one politician's record by another. Newsom sat rigidly in his chair, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. But Noem had saved her most devastating evidence for last. Governor Newsom, she said, reaching in her folder one final time, you've built your national political brand on the claim that California proves progressive policies work. You suggested that states like South Dakota should follow California's example. She pulled out a final document, this one bearing the official seal of the California governor's office. This is a memo from your own office, dated just 6 months ago, Noem announced. It's a request to the federal government for additional emergency funding to address what your own staff describes as crisis-level increases in violent crime throughout California. She read directly from the document. California is experiencing unprecedented levels of violent crime that threaten public safety and economic stability. Current resources are insufficient to address the magnitude of the crisis. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Newsom's own office had officially acknowledged the crime crisis that he had just spent 20 minutes denying existed. Your own staff, Governor Newsom, Noem continued, has admitted that California's crime rates represent a crisis that threatens public safety. Yet you stand here tonight and claim that California's approach to criminal justice is a model for America. She turned to face the cameras again. The American people deserve leaders who will be honest about the results of their policies, not politicians who will say anything to advance their careers. The final blow came when Noem displayed one last chart, a comparison of how citizens felt about safety in their own communities. The data came from a comprehensive polling survey conducted by a bipartisan research organization. In South Dakota, 78% of residents reported feeling safe walking alone in their neighborhoods at night. In California, only 51% of residents felt safe in the same circumstances. This is what progressive criminal justice reform has accomplished, Noem said, her voice now carrying unmistakable moral authority. California residents are twice as likely to be victims of violent crime as South Dakota residents, and they know it. They don't feel safe in their own communities. She gathered her documents and returned to her podium, her presentation complete. The devastating effectiveness of her attack lay not in political rhetoric or personal insults, but in the simple presentation of factual data that completely contradicted Newsom's narrative. Anderson Cooper, professional that he was, attempted to restore some semblance of normal debate format. Governor Newsom, would you like to respond to these statistics? Newsom's response revealed the full extent of his political crisis. Gone was the smooth confidence and polished rhetoric. In its place was the desperate improvisation of a politician whose entire narrative had just collapsed on live television. Look, Anderson, he began, his voice lacking its earlier authority. Statistics can be manipulated to tell any story you want. What Governor Noem isn't telling you is that California faces unique challenges that states like South Dakota simply don't understand. It was a weak response, and everyone in the studio knew it. Noem had presented official FBI statistics, California's own crime data, and documents from Newsom's own office. Claiming the numbers were manipulated only made him look more desperate. California is home to major international ports, diverse urban populations, and complex economic systems. Newsom continued, grasping for any explanation that might salvage his position. Comparing California to South Dakota is like comparing a major international airport to a small regional airfield. Noem allowed him to finish before delivering her response with surgical precision. Governor Newsom, respectfully, that response proves exactly what's wrong with progressive leadership today, she said. When presented with evidence that your policies aren't working, your response is to make excuses rather than address the problems. She gestured toward the screen, which still displayed California's crime statistics. These aren't just numbers, Governor. Each one represents a real victim of violent crime in your state. Each statistic represents a family destroyed by violence that your policies failed to prevent. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. You can make all the excuses you want about California's unique challenges, but the fact remains that your approach to criminal justice has made California less safe, not more safe. She turned to address the audience directly. And here's what Governor Newsom doesn't want to admit. Many of California's unique challenges are the direct result of progressive policies. The homelessness crisis that contributes to urban crime, that's largely the result of policies that prioritize ideology over results. The reference to homelessness opened up another devastating line of attack. Noem reached for yet another document from her seemingly inexhaustible folder. Since Governor Newsom mentioned California's unique challenges, let's examine another area where California was supposed to lead the nation, addressing homelessness. The new chart that appeared showed homeless populations by state, adjusted for overall population. California had by far the highest rate of homelessness in the nation, more than 3 times the national average. California has spent over $20 billion on homelessness programs in the past 5 years, Noem explained. That's more than many entire state budgets. Yet the homeless population has increased by 31% during that same period. She let that statistic sink in before continuing. In South Dakota, we've reduced homelessness by 23% over the same period, spending a fraction of what California spends per capita. The pattern was becoming clear to everyone watching. In every area where California claimed progressive leadership, the actual results told a story of failure. Higher crime, more homelessness, greater urban decay, all despite massive spending and progressive policies that were supposed to address these exact problems. Newsom tried once more to regain control of the narrative. Governor Noem, you're cherry-picking statistics to paint a misleading picture, he said, his voice rising with frustration. California leads the nation in economic growth, innovation, and environmental protection. We're the 5th largest economy in the world. It was true that California had economic advantages, but Noem was ready for this line of defense as well. You're absolutely right that California has economic advantages, she agreed, which makes your failure to translate those advantages into better outcomes for your citizens even more damning. She pulled out another document. California has the highest poverty rate in the nation when adjusted for cost of living. Despite having the world's fifth largest economy, California has the highest percentage of residents living in poverty. The new chart showed poverty rates adjusted for cost of living differences between states. California ranked dead last, worse than Mississippi, worse than West Virginia, worse than any other state in the Union. So yes, California generates enormous wealth, Noem continued. But that wealth isn't reaching California citizens. Instead, it's creating massive inequality while basic public services, law enforcement, education, infrastructure deteriorate. She gestured toward the poverty statistics. This is what progressive governance actually accomplishes. It creates massive wealth for the elite while leaving ordinary citizens poorer, less safe, and more desperate than they were before. The systematic destruction of Newsom's record was now complete. In every area where he had claimed success, Noem had presented data showing failure. In every category where California was supposed to lead the nation, she had shown California lagging behind states like South Dakota. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Noem's presentation wasn't any single statistic. It was the revelation that California's progressive leaders had built their entire political brand on a narrative that was contradicted by their own state's data. Cooper, sensing that the debate had reached its natural conclusion, attempted to move to closing statements. But Newsom wasn't ready to concede defeat, even though his position had become untenable. "Governor Noem," he said, his voice carrying a note of desperation, "you can cite all the statistics you want, but the reality is that California represents the future of America. We're leading on climate change, technology innovation, and social justice. Those are the issues that matter to young Americans." It was a final attempt to shift the conversation away from the areas where his record was indefensible, but Noem didn't let him escape. "Governor Newsom," she replied, "respectfully, young Americans care about being able to afford housing, being safe in their communities, and having opportunities for economic advancement. Your policies have failed to deliver any of those things." She gestured toward the charts that remained on the screen. "Young Californians are leaving your state in record numbers because they can't afford to live there, don't feel safe there, and can't find opportunities there. That's not leadership, that's failure."